Hello, welcome to my video on what ducklings need. We've had 4 ducklings since September last year and we love having ducks. They are not chickens, they are different to chickens, and I want to tell you about that in this video. I want to give you some of our tips, and please, if you have any corrections or things that you found work better, comment below and I'd love to see your advice as well, and it will help anyone watching too. So my number one thing for ducks is they must have access to water. This is something important from day one. They need to be able to flush out their system, all of their beak and throat, and water is the most important thing for that. Food, their food needs to be a goose and duck starter. So you'll usually begin on the starter and finish them on a finisher, even if they're breeding. You can get another few versions or variations of food as well, but the best thing to know for ducklings is go for a duck and goose starter. They have slightly different nutrients and proteins that the waterfowl will have as opposed to a chick starter. Number one thing in those nutrients is something called niacin. This helps form strong beaks, strong bones, strong feet, and it allows the duckling to grow as best as possible and get the best start to life. There are other things we can talk about as well, but I think the two big things that are different for chickens to ducks is the access to water and the niacin present in their food. So don't put them on the chick starter. Even if you just have leftover chick starter, we are depriving them of nutrients. The next thing I want to talk about is what kind of setup you'll have, and I'm going to show you guys videos as we go along of our setup. We have, as the bedding is a pine chip, bark chip, they need to be quite small. This is better than hay because hay will actually, it can be quite sharp and not so great on their feet, although hay can be an alternative. And I have heard about some people using things like newspaper or paper towel. The issues I have with newspaper is that it will leak the ink from the newspaper, and I feel like that is a toxin, and paper towel will become very wet and they are more inclined to start eating at it. So going for something like a pine bark chip is actually the most suitable. It's soft in their feet, it's small, and it's easy for you to change out without getting too smelly. It's excellent at absorbing the water and the moisture from the duck's environment, and that's the other thing about ducklings. They are messy. Okay, so from the beginning of their life, they will come out of the brooder, which I'll show you guys footage of. They'll go out of the incubator. They'll come after about 4 to 6 hours, or sometimes less. It really depends on the duckling. We've had ducklings that have been in there for about 3 to 4 hours, and they have been like trying to stand up and really bobbing around and have fluffed up really quickly. We've had others that have had to stay in there longer, so more of the 6-hour mark, so they can dry off properly in the incubator, and they're taking a lot longer to wake up properly, so they're not showing signs that they're ready to get out straight away. And once they go into their brooder, which is what the little duck home is called, set up, it's just a container that I actually keep right here in this office. It's the office barn, okay? Some people will be like, ew, no, put it in the shed, put it in the garage, put it in the barn. But for us, this is the best place because we can temperature control it and we can easily set up a heat lamp. So they're going to need a source of heat just like little chicks will. And the best way to do that is secure a heat lamp, particularly something like a reptile lamp with not high wattage, which get a nice warm heat, which is not a bright light, so it's not keeping them up all night. They're able to sleep under it and stay warm the whole time. As they get older, you will raise it up higher. So the best things to check for when your duckling is under the light, if they are running away to the corners of the sides of the brooder, it's too hot, they're trying to get away from the light. If they are all huddled together underneath it, straight under the light, and they're not really doing anything else, they're not really moving around for food and drink, they are too cold. So you're going to have to reduce the light to be closer to them. Of course, take care, being a fire hazard, you don't want to create a dangerous environment, of course. But what we want to do is just watch the duckling's behavior. What you want, the best kind of environment for the duckling will be for them to be under it sometimes, having a sleep, looking cozy and relaxed, and then able to move around, getting water, getting food, wandering around the brooder and going back for a sleep. they're like puppies. They were going to sleep a lot of the day as well. And the other thing I think is important when they are this young is to handle them. Give them all the cuddles. If you want pet ducks, if you're not just growing them for meat or just to be egg layers and you want them actually as pet ducks like we have, then giving them those cuddles from an early age is really important. And it makes it so much more fun. So we have had 2 sets of ducklings born from our ducks, which are 8 months old. We are actually in winter here in Australia, so for us to still have ducks that are laying and he is fertilizing the girls, it is amazing. So we're very blessed. A great way to get niacin into their diet or additional volumes of niacin is to add brewer's yeast or nutritional yeast. There's always debates about which one is better for niacin, or peas. Peas is not as full of niacin as something like brewer's yeast is. Brewer's yeast you can just sprinkle over the top of their food and it helps give them that extra boost. You can also do something for general health, like adding a little cap of apple cider vinegar into their water as well. That's a good general rule for most animals. And you can also have peas as a treat. That's something we've trained our ducklings on, to love peas. When they're this age, it'll be better if you can squish them down. We just use frozen peas. We warm them up in the microwave or defrost them rather, put them on a little plate and squash them with the back of a spoon, add some more water, and they gobble them up, and they can have that for a long period of time. It's sitting there for them to enjoy. Our ducks now, our adult ducks, are still being fed peas, and it's the perfect way to get them to where you need them to go if they're really being stubborn and they won't leave the pond or the garden. And then they can move into their bed at night time as well with a little pea treat. Without the mother duck, the baby ducklings don't have the natural oils coming off of her feathers onto them, so they don't have as much buoyancy to be in the water for long periods of time. However, you can give them supervised swims from the beginning of their life, as long as they have dried off properly from hatching in the shell and their temperature is at a reasonable level. So I would wait 5 hours after a duckling's born, not chuck them straight in the water after they've just been born, because I think that would be a shock to the system. If you've done that, let me know. And they will be able to be quite buoyant on their own as ducklings, and they will swim really well, but you need to be able to dry them off afterwards because they don't have those natural oils, and then it's straight back under the heat lamp. So a little routine for us in the morning is to clear out their brooder. I'll put them in another container just with bark chips so it's nice and dry. I'll transport them safely to the bathroom, fill the bath. It can be, however, depending on the age of your ducklings, you decide, and you can make it quite deep, even in the first couple of days, because then they'll get a proper swim happening. And give them a little platform within that bath water or in that container. I also make the temperature not super cold, particularly because it is winter here. Make it a little bit warm as well, so they're not having a shock to the system when they're going in, particularly because they're coming out from under the heat lamp straight into the bath. So you need to give them a bit more of a transition. And once they have had a 5-10 minute swim with me watching, giving a few breaks on their little platform, which is just like, I just use a little toddler step and chuck that in there so they've got an extra little spot. And you can put things like mealworms or sprinkle some herbs. Calendula flowers are great ones. Even chopped up spinach, you can put that in the water and they'll learn to forage through the water like that. Or fish it out rather. Once they come out, give them a little dry off with some towel and put them back into the bark chips, and I put them straight back under the heat lamp. They don't have any food and water in this particular container, because then I'll use that as an opportunity to change out their original brooder that they've been in overnight and they have made quite messy. As they get bigger, they're going to make more mess, be more pooey, and make a lot more splashing with their water. Something else that I think is important for overnight as well, because they're under the heat lamp, this is going to be a trial and error to see what works for you and your ducklings, but we would always have a little dish of water for them to be able to put their nose in completely. A lot of the water feeders from the fodder shops are made for chickens, and they can get in enough to have a drink, but they can't fully flush their nose through. My last few tips is that your ducklings can be exposed to weeds and soil and grass and things from your garden. while they're still in the brooder. So we like to do that before they go to sleep. Sometimes they can peep quite a lot because they want human attention, especially if they're used to having those cuddles. If they are together, and that is key, don't have one duckling on their own, they can die of loneliness, and it is what I see as a bit of a form of neglect because they're alone with nobody else. They need companionship. They need to be able to learn from their friend ducks, and if they're just on their own, it could be quite a painful life for that one duckling. Bringing in your soil or anything from your garden, particularly your own herbs, when they're not sprayed. Hopefully you don't use pesticides and things in your garden, and you're able to just provide them something natural straight from your yard into their little brooder to get used to all of the bacteria and the organisms from your garden, and that's a great way to start exposing them. The other thing is, of course, they can have outside time and supervised outside time. What I would do is set up with a little baby gate type scenario, you know, a little playpen, or even a old cot, like an old portable cot that you can bring out, and you can put little net or something over the top. But for them to learn to forage, it's really great for them to be exposed to that grass or garden bed area so they can learn to start getting their noses in the dirt, and it's so rewarding for them, and they'll be really tired after that. So about anything in your garden that you don't know if they can eat it, just have a Google, because there's a lot of information on what ducklings can and can't eat. Just as an example, they can't have everything from your kitchen. They can't have bread or beans, and there's quite a big list of things that they can't have when it comes to human food, but most fruits and vegetables are fine, and exposing them to those in small quantities to begin with alongside their feed that is meant for ducks is going to be a great way to give them a variety of nutrients and build up their immune systems as well. Of course, organic is the best, and if you can try and give them free food, that's going to be excellent, or your own homegrown veg, even better. Something that I think is a key thing for keeping ducklings inside is not having them exposed to perfumes or chemicals, including cleaning chemicals or things that you might spray or have going in your home, such as, like cleaning sprays or fragrances. Fragrance is a big one as far as poison is concerned. Anything that you have that's too perfumey, they have quite sensitive respiratory systems. So I use doTERRA essential oils, and I diffuse in other rooms. I don't diffuse in the same room that the ducklings are in. However, I always have oils usually on my skin, just making sure that I'm washing my hands before I'm picking them up and giving them a cuddle. And our ducklings are thriving, and I've always used that particular brand of oils on myself. You don't want to end up having heavy perfume on yourself and then giving them a cuddle. I think it's just mindful to think about how these are toxins and how they can affect these little tiny peeping beings. Runner ducks do not like the wind either, so it's something to keep in mind when you're building the coop for them to transition outside. And you'll find once they're in the brooder, they'll get too big. They'll need to be upgraded to either a playpen area or something that you can clean out quite easily, or into their own bed outside, temperature dependent. So their feathers will come in, they'll get their bigger feathers around that 3-month mark where they're their adult feathers, but they will have teenage feathers before then, and you'll see those coming in and understand what level they're at to be able to not need the lamp at all. And remembering to keep the lamp, raising it up or turning it down if you can, so they're not fully exposed to that heat. So if you have chosen to have ducks instead of chickens as your backyard pet, or even with chickens, there is one thing to keep in mind if you have chickens already. Drakes can actually kill your hens as they mate differently to a rooster, and that can be very dangerous for your hen. So because you won't be able to tell the sex of your ducklings when they are ducklings, you will have to wait until about 3 months. The way to tell a male is it will have a curled tail feather or a couple of curled tail feathers, and the sound of a male is more of a squabble. So Donald Duck's kind of sound is the way to recognise a male, whereas a female duck will have more of a quack, like a loud quack sound. She will have a smooth tail feather, and although you can try and guess before that 3-month age, the tail feathers of the males is the most dominant thing that you can tell what sex they are. We were so lucky. We have 3 females and 1 male, and he has enough ladies there to mate with. We also don't have any chickens for him to want to mate with. If you have a drake that has enough females with him, he's less likely to go after the chickens, but this is something you need to monitor the behaviour of your drake, monitor the behaviour of your chickens, or potentially separate them during their foraging time and during their bedtime especially. So just something to keep in mind, because getting ducklings is not a short-term thing. These ducks can live, we've got Indian runner ducks and they live for about 8 years. So this is a long-term commitment, almost that decade, and you need to think big picture how you're going to manage them. They are quite messy and they do need access to water. So you don't need to have a grand dam in your home. They need to be able to sort of duck dive there, clear out all of their face and nose and throat, and be able to have water alongside their feed as well, so that way they can properly digest the dry grain food that you'll be providing for them. So I hope this gives you a few tips. I hope you've learned something. If you have any corrections on any of the information that I've said, please comment below. I'd love to hear it, or anything to add, let me know. If you are considering ducklings, I would love to hear it as well. So thank you so much for listening, and enjoy your baby ducks.